There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a Welsh town when it is waiting for someone to come home. In August of 2026, that silence settled over the streets near Mumbles on the coast of Swansea as crowds gathered quietly along the road. Some had traveled from other countries just to stand there. They came holding flowers, they came holding old ticket stubs and vinyl records. They came, in many cases, without knowing exactly what they wanted to say, only that they needed to be there. They were waiting for Bonnie Tyler to come home. Not the version of her the world knew from arena stages and chart-topping records, but the girl from a coal mining family in Skewen who left school at 16 and somehow, against every odds stacked in front of her, became one of the most recognizable voices in music history. Her journey home was not a performance, it was a quiet final act of belonging Wales receiving back one of its own. This is her story. Bonnie Tyler was born Gaynor Hopkins on the 8th of June 1951 in the small town of Skewen near Neath in South Wales. Her father worked as a coal miner and had served in the Second World War. Her mother kept the household running. Together they raised 6 children in a modest council house where the record collection was as varied as the family itself. Elvis, Sinatra, the Beatles filling the rooms with music, long before anyone imagined that one of the Hopkins children would someday join their ranks. She left school at 16 with no qualifications and went to work in a grocery store, the kind of ordinary beginning shared by countless people who never end up on a stage at all. But something changed when her aunt entered her into a local talent competition. She didn't win. She came in second, and yet that near miss lit something in her that never went out. A talent scout heard her sing in a local club, and within a short time she had a record deal. What set her apart from the beginning was not polish, it was that voice, low, husky, and instantly recognizable. It sounded like it had lived through something, even in her earliest recordings. Critics and fans alike would spend the next 5 decades trying to describe it, and mostly settling on the same word, unmistakable. Her early singles built momentum, but it was 1983's Total Eclipse of the Heart that turned her into a global phenomenon, a song so powerful and so strange in its intensity that it became the first, and to this day, the only chart-topping Billboard Hot 100 single by a Welsh artist. A year later, Holding Out for a Hero cemented her as a defining voice of the era, a song that would go on to soundtrack decades of film, television, and personal memory for millions of people who never even knew her name, only her voice. Beneath the fame, she remained something rarer than a star, a working-class girl who never stopped working, who kept touring well into her 70s, and who represented the United Kingdom at Eurovision in 2013. In recognition of her decades of contribution to British music, she was appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire. Through all of it, she stayed rooted to Wales, keeping a home near Mumbles on the Swansea coast, the place she always returned to, no matter how far the music took her. By early 2026, Bonnie Tyler was preparing for what many were calling a comeback chapter. She had a tour scheduled with dates across the UK and Europe, including a long-awaited homecoming show planned for Cardiff. It marked the 50th anniversary of her first hit single, and there was a sense, shared by fans and by Tyler herself in interviews around that time, that this next stretch of shows was something to savor. Then, without warning, everything changed. She was hospitalized in Portugal for emergency surgery after what was reported to be a perforated intestine, a sudden and serious medical crisis that required immediate intervention. In the days that followed, she was placed into a medically induced coma while doctors worked to stabilize her condition. For nearly a month, the outcome remained uncertain, and the tour dates she had been so looking forward to were quietly canceled or postponed. Then came a moment of real hope. In June, her team confirmed that she had emerged from the coma. She was no longer unconscious, no longer in the most acute danger, but she remained, in her family's words, very unwell, still in intensive care in a Portuguese hospital. For those following her story, it felt like the beginning of a recovery. Fans held on to that update as a sign that the woman who had survived so much, already a career full of highs and lows, decades in an unforgiving industry, might survive this too. But recovery from an illness this serious is rarely a straight line, and for Bonnie Tyler, the road did not lead back to the stage. In early July, her condition worsened. The complications that had followed her since the initial surgery proved too severe. On the 9th of July 2026, in the early hours of the morning, she passed away in the same Portuguese hospital where she had spent much of the preceding months fighting to recover. She was 75 years old. The news broke through a statement posted to her official social media accounts issued by her family and her team. They described her passing as unexpected, a result of the illness she had been treated for, and asked for privacy as they processed the loss. It was a brief statement, but it carried the full weight of what had been, until that point, a story of hope. The response was immediate and global. Tributes poured in from fellow musicians, from political leaders, and from generations of fans who had grown up with her voice as part of the soundtrack of their lives. Her longtime representative, the music executive Judd Lander, remembered her as one of a kind, a performer with a stunning voice, a natural stage presence, and a sense of humor that endeared her to everyone who worked with her. In Britain, the tributes reached the highest levels of government. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister expressed sadness at her passing and called her one of the country's greatest recording artists. The Secretary of State for Wales described her simply as a Welsh music icon, a title that, more than any chart record, seemed to capture what she meant to her home country. Across Wales, radio stations played her music in tribute, and fans gathered informally in pubs and homes, the way communities do when they lose someone who felt, in some quiet way, like family. More than a month after her death, Bonnie Tyler came home to Wales one final time. In mid-August, her coffin was brought to Mumbles, the coastal community near Swansea where she had kept a home for years, the place she always returned to between tours and between chapters of her life. Crowds lined Newton Road as the cortege made its way from the funeral home to her residence in Lowynderdo. Some of the people who gathered had traveled from as far as Austria, waiting patiently, many with flowers, many simply standing in silence as she passed by one last time. Outside her home on Mumbles Road, floral tributes accumulated at the gate, left by fans who may never have met her but who felt through her music that they had known her all the same. It was a homecoming built not on ceremony or spectacle, but on the simple fact that this was where she belonged, the coastline she had chosen to return to again and again throughout her life, now the place that welcomed her home for the final time. A celebration of her life for family and close friends was held at Swansea Minster before her final journey carried her back to Skewen, the small mining town where Gaynor Hopkins had been born 75 years earlier, where a coal miner's daughter had first learned to sing in rooms filled with Elvis and Sinatra records, long before the world ever knew her name. In that sense, her story closed exactly where it began, in South Wales, among the people and the landscape that shaped her before fame ever entered the picture. For a country that had claimed her as one of its own, its first and only artist to top the American charts, its representative on the Eurovision stage, a voice heard in kitchens and cars and karaoke bars across generations, this was not simply a funeral procession. It was Wales quietly and completely welcoming its daughter home. Bonnie Tyler's voice will likely outlive every headline written about her passing. Total eclipse of the heart and holding out for a hero remain fixtures of radio, film, and television, discovered anew by listeners who weren't born when she first recorded them. That kind of staying power is rare, and it says something about the honesty in her sound, a voice that never tried to be anything other than exactly what it was. She mattered to generations of listeners not because she was flawless, but because she was real. A grocery store worker who became a global star without ever losing the accent, the humor, or the roots that made her who she was. She proved that a working-class girl from a Welsh mining town could stand at the very top of the music world and still come home to the same quiet coastline every time. In the end, that homecoming was her final gift to the country that raised her, a reminder that no matter how far the music travels, some voices always find their way back home.